The envelope had arrived addressed to someone who no longer existed, Miss Catherine Ashworth, correspondent, late of the Westminster Gazette, and she had opened it anyway. It bore the royal cipher in embossed ink, the sort of ink that costs more than a week of her rent, and inside it said, in the clipped subordinate clauses of official correspondence, that her attendance was requested at Kensington Palace on the 14th of February to assist in the preparation of a statement to be delivered by His Royal Highness Prince Edward on the occasion of International Women's Day, the 8th of March, and would she confirm her availability at her earliest convenience? She had confirmed it before she had finished reading. This was, she would later conclude, the most honest thing she had done in several years. The cab deposited her at the south gate, which was, as it turned out, the wrong gate. A footman directed her to the east entrance. The east entrance produced a secretary who directed her to a side door near the kitchen garden, which led to a corridor that smelled of boot polish and, eventually, to an anteroom furnished with 2 chairs, a clock, and a painting of a coastal landscape that had been hung slightly too high, so that you had to tilt your head to find its horizon. Catherine did not tilt her head. She sat in the left chair, set her notebook on her knee, and looked at the ceiling. The ceiling was worth looking at. A full plasterwork medallion at its center, ringed with acanthus leaves. She counted 14 on the outer ring, then counted them again, because the first count had been distracted, and from it hung a chandelier that was not lit, its crystals dusty in the gray February light from the single high window. She had been waiting 11 minutes when the door opened. He was not who she expected, because she had not known whom to expect, but, whatever category of person she had assembled in her mind, a secretary, a junior equerry, a clerk with a folder, this was not it. He was tall in the way that announced itself before anything else did. Dark coat. No decoration on it, which she registered as a choice. Eyes that had already taken the room's inventory before she had managed to close her notebook. "Miss Ashworth," he said. Not a question. Not a greeting, exactly. More like confirmation of a calculation he had already run. "Yes," she said, and stood, and her notebook slid from her knee, and the pages she had been drafting, her own pages, the ones she had written on the cab ride because she could not help herself, fanned across the floor between them. She crouched to gather them. He crouched too, at the same moment, and retrieved the page that had traveled furthest. He did not hand it back immediately. He read it. She did not reach for it. She did not know what the protocol was for a prince reading your rough work on the floor of an anteroom, and she was not willing to invent one badly. He read it. Set it face up on his knee. Read one line again, his eyes tracking back with the specific movement of a person who has found the sentence they were looking for. Not the women who stood in the light, but the ones who held the candle for those who did. "This is the address," he said. Not a question. Catherine looked at the page. At the line. She had written it in the cab without stopping, without revision, in the margin of her notebook where she put things she did not intend to use. "It's a draft," she said. "It's the address," he said again, and stood, and offered her the page with the same matter-of-fact economy with which he had crouched for it. She took it. Her fingers did not shake. She had practiced, over many years and, in many anterooms, not letting her fingers shake. "I was told," she said carefully, "that the commission was for assistance with preparation. Not authorship. Whoever told you that was imprecise." He moved toward the corridor door and held it open. "The writing room is on the east corridor. A fire has been lit. I'll join you in an hour." She followed him, because there was no sensible alternative, with the page that was apparently an address pressed flat against her notebook, and the 14 acanthus leaves still in her peripheral vision, and the thought unformed, inconvenient, something she did not intend to develop, that he had said "I'll join you" rather than "you'll be met by," and that the difference between those two phrases was not nothing. He had sent for her again. There was no protocol for what Catherine felt about that. The note had been delivered at 7 in the morning, before she had done anything useful, in the hand of a young footman who looked as though he had been dispatched before breakfast and was not sorry for it. "Miss Ashworth, review of Chapter 1, Draft, East Corridor Writing Room, 10 o'clock. No signature. It did not require one. She arrived at 5 minutes to 10, because she was constitutionally incapable of being late and pathologically averse to being early, and found the writing room exactly as she had left it the previous day, fire lit, paper laid, inkwell on the right side of the table. The inkwell was an extraordinary object, lapis lazuli, she was fairly certain, or something performing lapis lazuli very convincingly, with a silver lid that did not fit quite properly and would have driven her mad if she'd had to use it daily. It had the cold, decorative uselessness of something chosen for appearance rather than function. She kept registering it the way you register a stone in a shoe, involuntarily, repeatedly, with diminishing patience. Edward arrived at 10 o'clock precisely. He sat across from her without ceremony, which was its own form of ceremony. He had her draft in front of him, her actual draft, the 11 pages she had produced the previous evening after being shown to the writing room and left alone with the fire and her thoughts, and he had marked it, she saw, in pencil. Neat, spare notations in the margins. Not corrections. Questions. Why quiet here? Is silence chosen or imposed? Does strength require witness to exist? This assumes the reader has never been the candle. What if she has? Catherine looked at the questions and felt something shift in the region of her sternum, not a pleasant shift, the kind that means ease, but the specific discomfort of being accurately perceived by someone you expected to be looking elsewhere. You have notes, she said. Questions, he corrected. There is a distinction. He looked up from the page. What do you actually believe about the women you are writing for? The question was so direct that she spent a moment simply sitting with it, the way you sit with a piece of furniture that has been moved into an unexpected location and requires recalibration of every path through the room. I believe, she said, after a pause that she hoped was professional rather than stunned, that most of them have spent their lives making other people's work legible and have not been credited for it. Yes, he said. That is in the draft. What do you believe that is not in the draft? The inkwell sat in her peripheral vision, cold and blue and wrong for the table. I believe they know it, she said. I believe they have always known it. They don't require the address to explain their circumstances to them. They require, she stopped. Continue. They require someone to say it aloud in a room where saying it aloud carries weight. She looked at the page rather than at him. That's not a ceremonial address. Viscount Hartley made clear yesterday that a ceremonial address is what's required. Hartley, Edward said, with the economy of a man who had said a great deal about Hartley over many years and had refined it to a single noun, is not writing the address. You are. As if in answer to its name, Hartley arrived 7 minutes later. He was a man assembled entirely from precedent, the exact height, the exact coat, the exact expression of polished deference with steel underneath. He set a folder on the table and opened it with the precision of someone who had rehearsed the gesture. Inside, 12 pages. She could see, from her angle, that every paragraph was approximately the same length. Your Royal Highness, Hartley said, in the register that meant this is not a conversation. The household has prepared an approved draft. The committee felt that the current version, he did not look at Catherine, risked misinterpretation. Misinterpretation by whom? Edward asked. By any party with an interest in construing a royal statement as political commentary. It is a Women's Day address. Yes, sir. These matters require particular care. Edward considered the folder without touching it. Leave it, he said. I'll review both. Hartley laughed. Catherine looked at the folder. The folder looked back, impersonal and complete and deeply sure of itself. I can make it ceremonial, she said. The words cost her more than she intended them to. He looked at her then, not at the page, not at the folder, but at her, the way people look at a piece of furniture that has been moved, certain something is different, unable to name what. Read me the line again, he said. The candle line. She found it. Read it. He picked up his pencil. Set it down. Picked up her draft and read it from the beginning, standing by the window where the light was better, and she sat at the table and looked at the inkwell and counted its facets, 8 on the lid, an even number, which she found obscurely reassuring, and waited for a verdict that she had not been told she was allowed to want. Rewrite it tonight, he said, finally. He set her draft down. Don't make it ceremonial. She rewrote it that night. All 11 pages. She did not make it ceremonial. The gallery was supposed to be empty. She had taken the wrong corridor, a failing she was developing a certain resigned expertise in, and pushed through a door she thought led to the east staircase and found instead a long room where the February light came in gray and level through tall windows and fell across 30 years of painted faces watching her arrive. She nearly reversed. Then, she saw him. He was standing at the far end of the gallery with his back to her, in front of a portrait that was larger than its neighbors, a woman in late middle age, in the fashion of 40 years prior, seated beside a writing table stacked with correspondence. She appeared to have been interrupted mid-answering. The subject's hands were in her lap. Her expression was the expression of someone who had not been surprised in a long time and did not expect to be. He had not heard Catherine enter. She could have retreated. She did not. Her footsteps on the parquet announced her before she could decide on a form of apology, and he turned, and his face arranged itself into something that was not surprise but was adjacent to it, the recalibration of a room's contents. A door opened earlier than expected. Miss Ashworth. I took the wrong corridor, she said. I appear to be doing that with some consistency. Most people do, the first fortnight. He looked back at the portrait. There's no sensible map of this building. No one has ever thought to make one. She came to stand beside him, at a respectful distance that was also the natural distance for looking at a large painting. The woman in the portrait looked back at them both with the same patience she had presumably offered every viewer for 40 years. Who is she? Catherine asked. My great-grandmother's lady-in-waiting. Secondarily. He paused. The charitable institutions in the East Wing, the reading room, the letters program, the household school, she designed those. She ran them for 22 years from a room she was never officially assigned. Catherine looked at the hands in the subject's lap. The interrupted correspondence on the table. Is she in the official record? As a lady-in-waiting, he said. She attended 312 public engagements. Her name appears on 14 letters of thanks addressed to my great-grandmother. A pause. The institutions are still running. The low winter light reached the lower left corner of the portrait's frame and she noticed, she could not help noticing, that it was tarnished there, the gilt gone greenish-gray where the window's condensation had found it over decades. Someone polished this frame. Someone had missed that corner, repeatedly, or reached it and found it already too far gone. She wondered if they knew what hung inside the frame. She wondered if it would have changed the quality of their attention. I edited my mother's books, Catherine said. She had not planned to say it. She said it anyway, in the same tone she used for observable facts, because it was one. My father's name was on the covers. He was a journalist, a good journalist, genuinely. But, the arguments in the later books, the structure of them, the thing that made reviewers call his prose unusually precise after 30 years of calling it merely competent, she stopped. He knew. He thanked me in the margins of the manuscripts. He never thanked me anywhere else. She was looking at the tarnished corner of the frame. She was not looking at Edward. She held the candle, Edward said. Not quoting her. She could hear the difference. He had arrived at it from the portrait, from the institution still running, from the 14 letters of thanks addressed to someone else. The sentence she had written in a cab in the margin of her notebook, the sentence he had called the address on the floor of an anteroom, was apparently a thing two people could arrive at from different directions. She did not cry. She had a long-established structural position on crying in palaces, which was that she would not. She looked at the portrait for another moment. The subject looked back, patient, unhurried, interrupted mid-letter, waiting for no one to finish her sentences for her. The tarnish on the frame, Catherine said. Lower left corner. Someone's been missing it. Edward looked. He looked at it the way she had intended, carefully, as a fact that required acknowledging. I'll mention it, he said. Don't mention me. No, he agreed. They stood for another moment in the grey gallery light, and Catherine thought about her mother's handwriting in the margins of her father's manuscripts, and the 14 letters of thanks, and the institution still running, and did not revise a single word of what she had written. Viscount Hartley's note arrived before breakfast, which meant it had been written the night before, which meant he had been waiting. It was addressed to her, not to Edward, which was either a courtesy or a warning depending on which end of it you were reading from. The language was impeccable, regretful, warm, the sort of warmth that has been sanded down to an even temperature and maintains it regardless of circumstance. The commission had been reviewed. The household was grateful for Miss Ashworth's considerable contribution. Her draft had been received with great interest. It was felt, on reflection, that the address would benefit from the committee's guidance for its final form. A carriage could be arranged at her convenience. She read it twice. The second reading did not improve it. Then, she sat with the note on the writing table and looked at the fire, which had been banked rather than allowed to die, the coals heaped with the specific domestic care that meant someone expected the room to be used again, and she noted this with the part of her mind that catalogued practical information and did not allow it to mean anything yet. A morning passed. The writing table held her 11 pages and Hartley's folder and the lapis lazuli inkwell she had grown accustomed to hating. A secretary appeared at 11 to ask if she required anything. She said no. He withdrew. At 12 a tray appeared without her having asked for it, which she registered as either protocol or a small mercy and couldn't settle on which. Edward did not appear. She had not expected him to. She had been careful, over the preceding days, not to build expectations that would require dismantling. She was good at this. She had been good at this for a long time. By 2 o'clock she had made a decision. It was not a dramatic decision. It did not arrive with the force of revelation. It arrived the way most of her decisions arrived, through a series of small, honest accounting exercises, conducted alone, without an audience, at a writing table by a banked fire in a palace where she had never been meant to stay. The address was good. That was the first fact. It was the truest thing she had written in 6 years, possibly longer. It said what it meant. It did not make the women it addressed wait for their own worth to be explained to them. It said, "You already know." Here is someone, finally, saying it in a room where it counts. If the committee's version replaced it, the committee's version would be adequate. Ceremonial. Forgotten in a fortnight. That was the second fact. She did not want to be the reason someone's position was made precarious. She had spent enough of her life watching people bear the costs of other people's ambitions. The thought of Edward, the room attending him the way it attended no one else, the care he took with questions, the way he had crouched on an anteroom floor to retrieve her pages without it occurring to him to do otherwise, bearing a cost she had introduced, was not something she was able to be comfortable with. That was the third fact, and it was the most honest, and it undid her in a way that no dismissal ever had. She took a sheet of palace paper. Wrote one line, with the pen she had brought herself because the lapis lazuli inkwell was impractical and she'd known from the first day she would need her own, not the women who stood in the light. She left it on the table. Put on her coat. Picked up her notebook. Stood at the door. The fire was banked. Not dying. Banked. Someone had built it to last until evening, which meant someone had intended her to return, which was either a domestic habit or a thing she was not supposed to know about. She looked at it for a long moment, the careful heap of coals, the low steady warmth of it, the specific patient architecture of a fire that is waiting. She did not leave. Not yet. She took off her coat. Set it on the chair. Sat down at the writing table in front of the line she had written, and the banked fire, and the impractical inkwell, and the 11 pages Hartley wanted to replace, and decided, without drama, without announcement, with the quiet gravity of a woman who has performed an accounting and found herself on the credit side, that she was not finished here. She did not know, yet, what that meant. She knew it was true. He was standing at the wrong entrance, her entrance, the one she had been redirected from on the first day, and he was waiting. It was early morning, barely light, the kind of February morning that cannot make up its mind between fog and clarity and settles, discontentedly, on both. The wrong entrance was a modest door in the south wall, worn at the threshold where years of misdirected visitors had found it and been turned back, and Edward was standing beside it in a coat that was not his formal coat, his hands in his pockets, with the attitude of a man who had been there long enough to have stopped checking whether he was being observed. Catherine stopped when she saw him. He looked at her. Not at the ground, not at the distance, not with the managed expression of someone performing an important moment. At her. The way he had looked at her draft in the anteroom, tracking back to find the sentence that mattered. The address, he said, was delivered to the press this morning. She did not speak. As you wrote it, he said. With your name on it. Not as ghostwriter. Author. The fog moved. A door somewhere inside the palace closed on a distant corridor, the sound arriving late and muffled, belonging to a different sequence of events entirely. You understand what that involves, she said. For you. Yes. I don't require, she stopped. Start it again. You didn't have to do that to make it matter. I know, he said. Then, why? Because it was the address, he said. Simply. The same certainty with which he had said it on the anteroom floor, on his knees, holding a page she had written in a cab margin. This is the address. Not a question then. Not a question now. She stood at the wrong entrance in the February fog and looked at him and understood that the door was open. The commission was concluded. Her name was attached to something, which was either a gift or a complication depending on which she decided to make of it, and she owed him nothing, less than nothing. She was in his debt in a way that had no Victorian accounting for it, and she could walk away from this entrance, which had always been the wrong one, and return to the life she had built on the careful, practiced art of making other people's words visible and keeping herself tucked behind them. She had done it for 6 years. She was very good at it. She thought about the portrait in the gallery. The interrupted correspondence. The tarnished corner of the frame. The 14 letters of thanks addressed to someone else. She thought about the banked fire that had been built to last until evening by someone who intended her to return, and the margin note she had written without planning to, and the way he had asked, not told, asked, "What do you actually believe?" She thought about the writing room on the east corridor and the questions in pencil in the margins and the 4 seconds of silence when he had read the candle line, and she thought about her mother's handwriting in her father's manuscripts, and the specific weight of being seen by someone who had no reason to look. She had spent 6 years being the candle. She was not, she decided, required to remain in that position. This was not a revelation. It did not arrive with the quality of a sudden clearing. It arrived the way real decisions arrived, as the final step of an accounting that had been running, quietly and without her full attention, since the moment she had opened an envelope addressed to someone who no longer existed and confirmed her attendance before she'd finished reading. She looked at Edward. He was still watching her. Still waiting, with the patience of a man who had learned that the only things worth waiting for could not be hurried. I would like to see the portrait again, she said. That was all. Something happened in his expression, not relief, not triumph, nothing so legible. More like the recalibration of a room's contents when a door opens and the light changes and you realize the space is larger than you'd measured. He stepped aside. The door was open. Her door, the wrong one, the one worn smooth at the threshold by everyone who had come the wrong way and ended up, eventually, exactly where they needed to be. She thought of all of them, the hundreds of misdirected visitors, the ones who had stood at this stone threshold and been redirected, the ones who had found something else entirely by arriving incorrectly. She stepped through. He fell into step beside her, not ahead, not behind. The corridor was warm after the February morning, the palace already moving around them in its particular rhythm, the day beginning in all its protocol and precedent and the specific, ordinary hum of a place that had been running for a very long time. She did not know what her name on an address would do to the careful architecture of her life. She did not know what this was, precisely what it was called, what it cost, what it would require of her. She knew she had decided. She had not been rescued into deciding. No one had performed a choice on her behalf. She had stood at an open door, in the fog, at the wrong entrance, with her own accounting in front of her, and she had chosen. The portrait gallery was on the 3rd floor, east wing.
She knew the way now.
She did not take any wrong corridors.
A grey February morning outside Kensington Palace, London.
A young woman in a dark wool travelling coat stands at the south gate, a leather notebook pressed to her chest, looking at the gate with an expression of careful composure.
The palace wall extends behind her in the mist, gaslit lamps burning low in the fog.
Her dress is good but not fashionable, her posture correct but effortful. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. A palace footman in livery stands at the south gate, directing a young woman in a dark wool coat toward the east side of the building.
She carries a notebook and a small case.
The courtyard is cold and empty, cobblestones wet with morning fog, the palace facade stretching behind.
Her expression is composed, absorbing the misdirection without visible reaction.
Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. A stone corridor inside Kensington Palace, smelling of boot polish and old wood. A young woman in a dark coat follows a secretary past a row of closed doors, her footsteps precise on the flagstones.
Gas sconces burn low along the walls.
The corridor turns ahead. She does not look at the paintings she passes. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. A small anteroom inside Kensington Palace, lit by grey February light from a single high window.
A young woman in a dark wool dress sits upright in a wooden chair, a closed notebook on her knee.
The room holds 2 chairs, a long case clock, and a painting of a coastal landscape hung too high on the wall. The chandelier above her is unlit, its crystals dusty.
She is looking at the plasterwork ceiling medallion.
Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England.
Close detail, a Victorian plasterwork ceiling medallion, viewed from below, ringed with carved acanthus leaves.
Grey winter light falls across it from an unseen window. The plaster is cream-colored, the relief deep, the chandelier hanging from its center dark and unlit.
The detail is architectural and deliberate.
Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England.
A small anteroom inside Kensington Palace. A door has just opened.
A tall man in a dark formal coat with no decoration stands at the threshold, his posture easy, his eyes already taking in the room. A young woman has risen from a wooden chair, her notebook beginning to slip from her knee.
The clock on the mantelpiece reads 11 minutes past the hour.
Grey light from a high window falls between them. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England.
An anteroom inside Kensington Palace.
Loose papers and handwritten notebook pages are scattered across the floor in a fan. A young woman and a tall man in a dark coat are both crouching to gather them, their faces level, close in proximity.
He has one page in his hand and is reading it.
She has gone still, watching him read.
The clock ticks behind them.
Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England.
Close detail, a single handwritten page on the floor of a Victorian anteroom.
The paper is cream notepaper, the handwriting neat but rapid, with one line underscored once in the lower margin.
The surrounding floor is polished parquet.
A pair of men's dark dress shoes is visible at the edge of the frame. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England.
An anteroom inside Kensington Palace.
A tall man in a dark coat stands, one hand extending a single page back toward a young woman. She is reaching for it with careful composure, her chin level, her expression revealing nothing.
The page is held between them. The coastal landscape painting is visible on the wall behind her, hung too high.
Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. A stone corridor inside Kensington Palace, East Wing. A tall man in a dark coat holds a door open for a young woman in dark wool who is passing through ahead of him. She carries a notebook pressed flat against her chest, one page tucked inside it. The corridor ahead is long, lit by gas sconces, the walls paneled in dark wood.
Neither looks at the other.
Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England.
A small writing room on the east corridor of Kensington Palace, early morning.
The room is lit by a coal fire and a white grate and grey light from a sash window. A writing table holds clean sheets of paper, a pen tray, and a lapis lazuli inkwell with a silver lid. A wooden chair is pulled to the table.
The fire has been recently lit. The room is empty but expectant.
Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England.
Close detail, a lapis lazuli inkwell on a Victorian writing table.
The stone is deep blue, almost cold-looking, with a silver lid that does not seat perfectly flush.
The table's surface is polished oak.
A pen lies beside it, unused. Morning light from an unseen window falls across the object. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. The entrance hall of lodgings near Kensington, early morning. A young woman in a dark wool dress stands at a side table reading a folded note. A young footman waits near the door, hat in hand.
Her expression is controlled, absorbing the contents.
The hall is modest, a coat stand, a narrow carpet, gaslight not yet adjusted for day. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England.
A street in Kensington, early morning. A young woman in a dark coat walks at a purposeful pace along a wet pavement, notebook under her arm. Bare February trees line the street. Horse-drawn traffic passes at a distance. The gas lamps are still lit. She does not hurry.
Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England.
A small writing room on the east corridor of Kensington Palace, 10 o'clock morning.
A young woman in a dark wool dress sits at a writing table, her notebook open, her hands folded.
The lapis lazuli inkwell is in the right corner of the table.
The fire burns in the white grate.
The room is quiet.
She is waiting, and her posture holds it without showing it. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England.
A small writing room on the east corridor of Kensington Palace.
A tall man in a formal coat sits across a writing table from a young woman. He has 11 pages of manuscript in front of him, marked in pencil. She is watching him with careful attention.
The fire burns at the side.
Morning gray light comes through the sash window. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. Close detail, margins of a handwritten Victorian manuscript page, marked with pencil annotations. 3 questions are written in a neat, spare hand in the margins. The main text is visible but not legible. The paper is cream, slightly handled. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England.
A small writing room on the east corridor of Kensington Palace.
A young woman and a tall man sit across a table from each other.
He has asked her something and is watching her, waiting.
She is looking at the inkwell rather than at him, her expression composed, her hands still on the table. The fire is reflected in the window glass behind her. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England.
A small writing room on the east corridor of Kensington Palace. A tall man in a formal coat stands in the doorway.
He has just arrived. The man at the table, a viscount in a dark coat, a folder before him, is presenting the folder with practiced precision. The young woman sits at the side of the table, her expression neutral, watching the folder rather than either man. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England.
A small writing room on the east corridor of Kensington Palace.
A viscount in a dark coat stands before a seated prince, presenting a leather folder. His posture is the posture of precedent, formal, exact, deferential with edges. The young woman at the table has become very still.
Gaslight and firelight mix in the room.
Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England.
A small writing room on the east corridor of Kensington Palace. A viscount has just left.
A leather folder sits unopened on the table. A young woman and a tall man face each other across it. She is looking at the folder. He is looking at her. The fire burns.
The lapis lazuli inkwell is between them.
Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England.
A small writing room on the east corridor of Kensington Palace.
A tall man has risen from the table and stands at the sash window, reading a manuscript page in the better light. His back is partly turned. The young woman sits at the table below, looking at the lapis lazuli inkwell, waiting. The coal fire burns in the white grate. The room is quiet enough to hear the clock in the hall. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. A young woman at a writing table in modest lodgings near Kensington, late evening. A lamp burns at her elbow. She is writing rapidly, 11 pages spread around her. Her coat is on the back of the chair. The window is dark. Her expression is focused, almost fierce, the expression of someone who has decided to mean what she is writing. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. Close detail, handwritten manuscript pages spread across a modest writing table, lamplight falling across them. Some pages are heavily revised with crossings out and marginal additions. The handwriting is neat but rapid, showing the pace of someone who knows what they want to say. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. A long portrait gallery inside Kensington Palace, mid-morning, lit by grey level light from tall windows on one side. The parquet floor stretches into the distance. Painted portraits line the walls on both sides, men and women of the Victorian period, gilt-framed, watching the room. The gallery appears empty. A door at the near end is slightly ajar. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. A long portrait gallery inside Kensington Palace. A tall man in a formal coat stands alone at the far end, his back to the room, looking at a large portrait. He has not heard anyone enter. The parquet floor, the grey window light, the watching portraits on either side, everything is still. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. A large Victorian portrait, a woman in late middle age, seated beside a writing table stacked with correspondence. Her dress is in the fashion of 40 years prior. Her hands are in her lap. Her expression is patient and unsurprised, a face that has not expected to be surprised in a long time. The background is a dim interior. The frame is heavy gilt. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. A long portrait gallery inside Kensington Palace. A young woman in a dark dress is stopped near the near end of the gallery, looking toward a tall man standing at the far end. He has heard her footsteps and has turned. His expression adjusts, not surprise, but recalibration. The grey window light falls between them across the parquet. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. A long portrait gallery inside Kensington Palace. A young woman and a tall man stand side by side before a large portrait. They are at a respectful distance from each other, both looking at the painting. The grey window light falls across the subject's hands and the stacked correspondence on the painted table. The gallery is silent. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. Close detail, the lower left corner of a large gilt portrait frame inside a Victorian gallery. The gilt has tarnished to a greenish grey where decades of window condensation have reached it. The rest of the frame is polished. The canvas is visible at the edge, the lap of a seated woman, her hands folded. Grey winter light from the window. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. A long portrait gallery inside Kensington Palace. A young woman stands before the large portrait, looking at the lower left corner of the frame rather than the subject. A tall man beside her has followed her gaze and is looking at the same spot. Both are quiet. The light is flat and grey. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. A small writing room on the east corridor of Kensington Palace, late evening. The young woman sits at the writing table, the fire burning low. She is not writing. Her 11 pages are in front of her, unrevised, and she is looking at nothing in particular, a look of someone sitting with a thought they have decided not to move from. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. Modest lodgings near Kensington Palace, early morning. A young woman in a dark dress stands at a side table reading a formal note. The note is on palace paper. Her expression does not change while she reads it. The room is quiet, the gaslight adjusted for morning. She reads it a second time. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. Close detail, a formal Victorian note on palace paper, read twice. The handwriting is official, clipped, impeccable, warm in a way that has been sanded to a single temperature. The royal cipher appears at the top. The paper is slightly pressed from being folded. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. A small writing room on the east corridor of Kensington Palace, mid-morning. A young woman sits at the writing table. The fire has been banked, the coals heaped and low, maintaining warmth without flame. The lapis lazuli inkwell is on the table. Hartley's folder and her 11 pages are both present. The room is occupied by a single figure who is not writing. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. A small writing room on the east corridor of Kensington Palace. A palace secretary stands in the doorway asking a question. The young woman at the table answers him without looking up from the papers before her. He withdraws. The door closes. She is alone again. The banked fire gives steady, low warmth. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. A small writing room on the east corridor of Kensington Palace, noon. A tea tray has appeared on the writing table beside the manuscript pages and the folder. No one brought it in while the young woman was watching. She is looking at it with an expression that cannot decide whether it is protocol or a message. The fire is banked. The inkwell is cold and blue. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. A small writing room on the east corridor of Kensington Palace, afternoon. A young woman sits at the writing table with a sheet of palace paper before her and a pen in her hand. The manuscript pages and the folder are pushed to the side. She writes one line and stops. She looks at what she has written. She does not cross it out. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. Close detail, a single line written on palace notepaper in a neat rapid hand. The line reads, "Not the women who stood in the light." The pen has been set down beside it. The paper is slightly warm from the nearby fire. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. A small writing room on the east corridor of Kensington Palace. A young woman stands at the door in her coat, a notebook in her hand. She has turned to look back at the room. The banked fire is visible in the white grate, low, steady, a fire built to last until evening. The writing table holds the line she has written and the 11 pages and the impractical inkwell. She is looking at the fire. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. Close detail, a banked coal fire in a white marble grate inside a Victorian palace writing room. The coals are heaped carefully, giving a low steady warmth without flame. The grate is clean. The surrounding room is lit only by this fire and the gray afternoon light from the sash window. The fire has been built by someone who expected the room to be used again. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. A small writing room on the east corridor of Kensington Palace, afternoon. A young woman has taken off her coat and set it on the back of the chair. She is sitting down again at the writing table. The banked fire is behind her. The line she wrote is in front of her. Her notebook is closed. Her hands are still on the table. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. The south wall of Kensington Palace, early morning. A modest door stands in the stone wall, a staff or side entrance, not the ceremonial gates. The threshold is worn smooth from use. February fog sits against the building, the sky barely light. A tall man in a plain coat stands beside the door, hands in his pockets. He is waiting, and has been waiting long enough to have stopped monitoring it. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. The south wall of Kensington Palace, early morning. A young woman in a dark coat has stopped a short distance from the modest side door. A tall man stands beside it. She is looking at him. He is looking at her directly, without performance, the way he looks at sentences he needs to read twice. The fog is between them. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. Outside the modest side entrance of Kensington Palace, early morning fog. A tall man in a plain coat faces a young woman in a dark traveling coat.
He is speaking. She is listening without moving. The stone wall of the palace rises behind him. The worn threshold is between them. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. Close detail, the worn stone threshold of a modest side door in the wall of Kensington Palace. The stone is pale and smooth from years of foot traffic. February frost lingers in the mortar lines. A pair of women's boot toes is just visible at the lower edge of the frame, standing at the threshold. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. Outside the modest side entrance of Kensington Palace, early morning. A young woman stands at the worn threshold, her hand not yet on the door. She is looking at a tall man who has stepped aside to let her pass. His expression holds something that is not relief and not triumph, the careful recalibration of a man who asked a question and is waiting to understand the answer. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. The modest side door of Kensington Palace, open. A young woman steps through the threshold from the February fog into the warm corridor beyond. A tall man follows half a step behind, not ahead. The stone gives way to polished flagstone. The corridor stretches ahead. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. A stone corridor inside Kensington Palace, morning. A young woman in a dark coat and a tall man in a plain coat walk side by side, not ahead and behind, but level along a passage lit by gas sconces. The palace moves around them, a footman at the far end, the sound of a door, the smell of beeswax and coal. Neither speaks. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. A long corridor leading to the east wing staircase of Kensington Palace. A young woman in a dark coat walks with purpose, a tall man beside her. She knows where she is going. She does not hesitate at any turning. Morning light enters from a high window at the corridor's end. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. The east wing staircase of Kensington Palace, morning. A young woman ascends the stairs with a steady, unhurried pace. A tall man follows beside her. The staircase is polished stone, the banisters wrought iron painted black. Portraits line the stairwell, watching faces of another generation. The light improves with each landing. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. The entrance to the portrait gallery, 3rd floor, east wing, Kensington Palace. A young woman in a dark coat and a tall man in a plain coat stand at the gallery's open doorway. She is looking into the room. The gray level light from the tall windows stretches down the long room ahead. The portraits wait on either side. She is not hesitating. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. A long portrait gallery inside Kensington Palace, 3rd floor, east wing, morning. A young woman and a tall man walk the length of the gallery side by side. The parquet floor, the gray window light, the watching painted faces on either side. At the far end, the large portrait waits, the woman with the interrupted correspondence, the hands in the lap. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. A long portrait gallery inside Kensington Palace. A young woman and a tall man stand together before the large portrait at the gallery's end. She is looking at the tarnished lower left corner of the frame. He is looking at the same spot. The morning light falls flat and honest across everything, the painting, the frame, the two people standing before it. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England.